Hello there. As somebody who writes film reviews for an online web magazine, insert shameless plug here, I understand the responsibility of being a film critic. You give your opinion on a movie, even though in the end it's the person's individual opinion that matters, and you shouldn't just blindly agree with somebody, especially without watching the film in question first. And certainly, one of the most well-known critics out there is Jay Sherman, the star of the great and sadly short-lived animated series, The Critic. Oddly enough, the series did not initially revolve around Jay. The genesis of the idea came from The Simpsons executive producer James L. Brooks, who suggested to writers Al Jean and Mike Reiss to make a sitcom revolving around the makeup lady for a morning talk show. Knowing nothing about makeup, Jean and Reiss instead set their sights on the Critic character, with Jon Lovitz being the choice to play him. Due to his Broadway commitments, though, The Critic became an animated series, and David Silverman designed the look of Jay Sherman. Jay Sherman is the critic for a show called Coming Attractions, which, despite the low ratings and his unpopularity with the public, manages to stay on the air. He is notable for hating a lot of the cynical cash-grab sequels that come out of Hollywood, and praising more artistic fare that not a lot of people watch. The writers could have easily made him unlikable and stuck up, but he's actually very likable and sympathetic. It's also helped by Jon Lovitz's great voice work on the character, and he displays nice chemistry with the other personalities on the show. One particularly amusing running gag involving Jay is poking fun at his weight, and while they could get old very quickly, the writers managed to walk that line, making them consistently funny in their execution. Despite his faults, Jay is shown to be very intelligent in his knowledge of film, and try and hold on to his dignity and self-respect. In the first episode, where he becomes involved with an up-and-coming actress, he faces the moral dilemma, having to pan her performance and fearing that she will leave him because of it. This really shows that Jay does legitimately care for the people in his life, even if he spends most of his time watching movies he hates. Jay works for Duke Phillips, a wild-brain tycoon obviously inspired by Ted Turner, and seeing that different worldviews collide leads to some funny interactions, especially when Phillips decides to change classic films around to make them more mass-appealing. On the other end of the spectrum, Jay has a nice relationship with his son Marty as he continually tries to support him, and it's evident Marty takes a lot from his father. Then there is adopted parents. His father is eccentric, and even though a lot of what he says is nonsense, there is actually some strange logic behind what he says, and that makes it all the more funnier. His mother, who has a certain Katharine Hepburn resemblance, is not afraid of going far to attain her goals and putting Jay down. His adopted sister Margot, voiced by Nancy Cartwright in the rare time she has not voiced a child, is actually my favorite character on The Critic outside of Jay. Aside from wearing a hoodie, which always gets bonus points from me, she's very good-hearted, as well as a strong character who sticks to her strong positions as best as she can. She holds a lot of respect for Jay, and they obviously care a lot about each other. It's that heart that made the series special, more than simply a series of film parodies. Speaking of film parodies, that element is done incredibly well too. The writers have an obvious knowledge of Hollywood tendencies and satirize it exceptionally well. Voice actor Maurice LaMarche took the reins for a lot of these parodies, especially with his impressions of Orson Welles and Howard Stern. Some of my favorite parodies to appear on the show would have to be The Piano, The Lion King, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and its version of Jurassic Park 2. One particular highlight was even a fictional film where Jay shows his student film, a parody on an overly artsy production. Despite the enjoyment of the characters and the clever satire of its film parodies, The Critic was sadly a bit of a stepchild on the ABC schedule, even when it played before Home Improvement. That's a shame, because there were quite a number of talented folks who worked on it. Rich Moore, who was very instrumental in the early success of The Simpsons and just recently directed Wreck-It Ralph, was the animation director for the series. Brad Bird continued his Simpsons duties by serving as a creative consultant on the show, and Judd Apatow got one of his early starts as a writer and consulting producer on The Critic. Meanwhile, one Jendy Tartakovsky of Dexter's Laboratory and Hotel Transylvania fame was an animation timer for the first season. When ABC cancelled the show, it moved to Fox, albeit with a lower budget, and it's obvious as the animation got a bit of a downgrade. Jay was also slightly redesigned with a rounded head and bigger eyes to make him look more sympathetic and easier to animate. In a controversial move that angered Matt Groening, James L. Brooks arranged for Jay to cross over onto The Simpsons, though I think they managed to make it not look too shameful and cynical, especially since they make fun of the concept at one point. The biggest change for the second season was the addition of a new girlfriend named Alice, who Jay falls in love with. Their relationship is very sweet, and it's hard not to root for those two when they have their little squabbles. However, the critic didn't descend too much into schmaltiness, and managed to keep the humor alive with the playful banter between Jay and Alice. The show did a little better on Fox, both critically and ratings-wise. One audience who was not surprisingly appreciative of it were actual film critics. Rex Reed and Gene Shalit were willing to voice animated versions of themselves, showing they could take a joke. The Critic even became the only television show to be reviewed by Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, though they gave it a mild recommendation. They eventually guest starred as themselves on the second season episode, Siskel and Ebert and Jay and Alice, which is actually my favorite episode of the show. In it, the two critics split up and Jay tries to become their new partner, and I have to say they were really funny. Siskel and Ebert even sang in the episode, a moment that's actually kind of emotional to watch now. Ultimately, after only 10 episodes, the show was cancelled by Fox, despite its improved ratings, mainly because the president of the network did not care for it. A number of years later, the Critic returned in a series of webisodes animated by Shockwave, but they just lacked the same feel as the earlier show. The film parodies were a little humorous, and it's kind of funny to see internet animation from over a decade ago, but most of the characters were gone with no explanation. Mostly it was Jay Sherman trying to go on dates with his new makeup lady, who was frankly a bore. Where's Alice, or Marty, or Duke Phillips? The webisodes just felt like a lame attempt to capture that earlier magic. Oh well. In conclusion, The Critic Will Live On is a funny satire of the film world with a likable critic at its center, and frankly, a must-see for anybody who loves going to the movies. See you next time.